here. For the second year in a row, we have invited Ezra Eeman. Ezra Eeman is our advisory board member of Future Media Hubs and also change director at Mediahuis. And he will give us some insights in the media trends for the upcoming year. So thank you, Ezra, for that. And I would like to ask each of you, if you have a question, to put it either in the chat or to raise your hand, and to introduce you while doing that, so that Ezra also knows where the question is coming from. I don't know, Ezra, if you want it to be interactive or if you prefer to have the questions at the end. I leave that up to you. But anyway, thanks everyone for being here. Enjoy the session, and we will also record it and write a short summary that we will share afterwards as well. So over to you, Ezra.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me again. I would suggest for questions, put them in the chat or write them down somewhere, and we'll take them at the end of the session, just to keep the narrative flowing, because otherwise we might not end there. I think my presentation itself should be about half an hour, a bit more. I didn't want to make it too long, so I'll certainly. I skipped a few chapters to make it digestible. Otherwise, I know from experience, it's a bit of an overload. But with that said, I'll try to start sharing my my slides, and then we can get going. Let's see. This is okay. Yes, Sarah, there is Zoom has to be
an issue. It's sharing your screen now, or
yes. I'll see first of all if I can actually share my screen. It's just, it gave me a notice about recording. It's an Apple thing where they so I'll see again if I can, there it is. And then just tell me if you see my screen.
We do. Yes, thank you.
I think that's the most important. I'm not sure if you will be able to record the slides, but it gave kind of an error that you will not be able to record it. So maybe you will afterwards discover that you have all black in the middle of this presentation. We'll see. Anyway, good morning again. So I'm happy to see familiar faces here. Last year, I was asked to give my perspective on the upcoming trends for the year ahead. And this year, again, I have compiled some insights and ideas that might give you a perspective of what's around the corner. Last year, there was suddenly a bit of a buzz around the vibe shift. I don't know if any of you heard about it. It's a term that was coined during the summer, and it started to appear everywhere. And a vibe shift is that hard to define feeling that something is about to change, that trends and patterns of today are a bit tired and expired and ready for disruption. And I think by now, at the end of the year, we all feel it's more than a vibe shift. There's a new wave of technologies that is heading towards us, and that might well change a lot of the fundamentals of the news landscape. And in my opinion, for media, the future is no longer about becoming more digital or transformation to digital, but about the transformation of digital itself, which is another phase. A bit about myself, I think Sarah already told, I'm currently change director at Mediahuis. For those who don't know Mediahuis, we're a publisher with a portfolio of newspapers and marketplaces in Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Ireland, and Germany. And my role within Mediahuis is to consider the changes in the media landscape and translate that to what it means for newsrooms and how we make it, how we make and produce news. You can call me a bit an internal trend spotter, bridging our product strategy and newsroom production. And much of what I will talk about today is just that, an outlook of things to come and how they might impact what we do. So every day, every year, I do a recap of the trends and an outlook of the biggest trends. I have no time to go through all of them, so I've skipped a few, but for those who want to see, of course, the whole bundle, I think it's, most of you might have seen it online, or I can send it afterwards as a presentation to Sarah for distribution to the group. I think before we head in specific topics, it's important to capture the general context. And I think it's no secret for all of you that the mood has shifted a bit as well. The COVID years were privately tough, but they brought audiences in mass to us media makers and publishers. We actually had good years, good media years through the COVID period. But now it seems that we're heading into a perfect storm. We're not just facing one crisis, but a series of interlocking crises. An economical one started with a disrupted supply chain, rising cost of living, the uncertain job market. A socio-political one, we're confronted more and more with polarization, inequality, and a loss of trust in news. There is the ecological crisis, and finally, an individual crisis with increasing mental health issues and chronic loneliness. As you see, quite a starting point for the year ahead. And in various surveys, people indicate they're feeling the crunch. We're collectively concerned about the inflation. Will we be able to continue to pay everything? And of course, that has an impact, certainly for business models like the one I'm currently in, where subscriptions are part of your offer. And the fear of higher prices forces people to rethink their financial choices. And already we see a slowing down of subscriptions and the churn pressure is rising. The low-hanging fruit has been picked. And when every euro counts, subscriptions are being questioned too. That's so in the newspaper landscape, that's the same for the VOD or any other subscription business. Moreover, in my business, newspapers all over the world were confronted with rising paper prices. And as a reflex, many have downsized editions and started to consider weekend-only editions or digital-only options. So there was an increased pressure to let go of physical assets and to move to digital spaces. On a societal level, polarization is still increasing, even if it's less pronounced in Europe. With upcoming elections, you still see that polarization is very much a given also in Europe, even if it's much more prominent in the US. And perhaps something that should concern us all is that a majority of people, 67%, according to last year's trust report, and I would need to verify the latest one, but I don't think it has meaningfully changed, now indicates that most people worry that they're being misled by journalists and reporters. So the core of what we do as media, of news media, is being questioned as reliable. And in all, it's a lot to cope with. Research suggests that the Generation Z are the most anxious generation to date. Increasingly, they turn to platforms like TikTok for mental health help and resources over going to traditional healthcare. So it stays also under the waterline, and there's a feeling that they have to cope with it themselves or as a community rather than can go to institutions or turn to media. And I think a growing number of publishers realizes that news that only adds to problems causes people to drop out, to say, I cannot cope with this anymore. Initiatives like the Solutions Story Tracker and Solutions Journalism Accelerator help newsrooms actually investigate how they can develop a more solution-focused kind of journalism. So far, that's a kind of the gloomy context in which everything is a bit embedded these days. So let's get back to that vibe shift and take a deeper dive in certain trends and topics, and particularly the one that's happening in the hands of the youngest generation, and the generation that was born in a mobile and social world is now turning 16. Remember, Facebook was publicly launched in 2006 and the iPhone in 2007. So that's a full generation that was completely social and mobile. And you can consider it a bit of Sweet 16 or as a coming of age that's marked by the usual resisting and rejecting of the status quo. Already you can see that the news generation is less engaged in traditional social media networks, which they feel are no longer a good way to express themselves and are no longer completely to be trusted. You see it also more globally in consumption patterns of media it's becoming apparent that there's a growing gap between this generation and the ones before. The decline in linear radio and TV is more outspoken in this generation than before. And the rise of time in new social apps is also more outspoken. The same pattern emerges if you zoom in on their news behavior. And this is data from the latest Reuters digital news report from last year, where there is a clear gap opening between the youngest generation and the ones before. These social natives are spending their time in apps like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat, and are much less likely to directly visit news websites or apps. So in terms of direct traffic, they will there is really a decline there. The landscape of young people's news consumption is, there is not like a one size fits all. This is also from a really interesting Reuters Institute report together with Kraft. And they define it as a kind of kaleidoscope, everything that influences where and how people consume news. If you see that influence wheel, it is from personal conditions to contextual cues, and also different levels of interest. Not an easy landscape to navigate as a media brand. Like, try to fit your message into this landscape. It's really not easy, but it's interesting to look at through these lenses and start considering what's your best entry point for this generation. Another really interesting piece of research that came out last year was around news moments, done by the Flemish high school Artevelde. And they looked at new media moments that are specifically shaped, I would say, in general or more specific, by mobile phones and social video apps. They identified 7 distinctive mobile moments. I'm taking out of equation the binging, because that's something that's happening more on a TV or on a desktop and less on mobile. But the other moments are really specific, related to mobile behavior. And you see how they divided it. On one side, highly engaged and short moments like search, chat, snacking media moments. There's also the non-engaged moments where you just like fill your time or things get pushed to you. So it's more passive behavior. And on the other side, longer media moments like binge one, and the kind of backgrounds like just music or video or anything else that's plays in the background and it is also in your media space. And by understanding these media moments and their level of available time and engagement associated with them, media and news media can rethink how they package what they want to offer and distribute it in the right format for the right kind of engagement and the right kind of time that's available during these moments. Young users also have become more deliberate about how they present themselves online. There's a move away from the big social media giants, as we already said, although there's still a really big size of audience there, associated with likes, clickbait, lack of privacy. And then the new landscape is smaller, but it's fast growing. And these apps have in common that they're more direct, more private, they're more community based. It could be Twitch, Discord, Be Real. There's others out there as well. And it's a fast moving landscape, but they have these common connection of being more private, more community based, and more direct. It's also interesting to note that the social video apps that stand out today, like TikTok or Snapchat, are the ones that are embracing the full potential of that mobile technology. They use the camera of the smartphone. They use the location services. They allow the audience to interact. They allow to enrich content with stickers, with memes, to augment reality. So they use the whole arsenal of the mobile phone. And in these apps, it's not so much about presenting the content, it's rather about enabling the user. And that's a really different perspective. It's not just pushing content somewhere, it's about what can the user do with that content? How can they interact and start using it? And I think that's a really interesting perspective to take into account. And because of it's on these small screens that their phones that the people and audiences are coming together. there is where the action is actually happening. There is where your content starts living, because people start sharing it, discussing it, what they love most. They react on scenes, they discuss a topic, they start parodying your content. And entertainment companies, certainly in the movie business or series business, are already making content with that in mind. They know if we make this, or if we play specific content in our this will be able to be reused. This could become a meme. This could become like a scene that people will discuss online. So they already have that second layer, that second moment in mind when they create content. Finally, it's about enabling and fostering those communities, as I said, from discussing the latest soccer matches to watching plane lands during storm weather. That was one of the major sensations on YouTube, like during a major storm. I think in the UK, there was nearly 250,000 viewers that just watched planes land and commented on seeing what would happen there. And again, big social platforms are seeing that behavior and starting to facilitate this. So the question is, can news organizations and media companies take a page out of that playbook and also do something to foster communities? The audience is, of course, not shifting on their own. Technology is shaping that behavior. So it's not just a new generation with new ideas, it is also new technology that's kind of facilitating this behavior. And the biggest shift is that away from user control and friction to more effortless interfaces and algorithmic selection. So it's kind of moving away from interfaces where you have to do a lot of yourself and moving towards interfaces that are more effortless. And of course, this is a battle for attention and the relationship with the consumer. New models challenge the old ones, and media companies will have to make a choice. Are they curators? Do they steer the experience? Do they select? Do they have the expertise, brand power, and curation skills? And which is very important. So I would say legacy brands with a big good established brand might want to hold on to that curated expertise position. Are they leveraging the social connections? Like, do they want to use the network, which is the classic Facebook approach, or should they perfect the attention algorithm and surface content that sticks? And actually, you're not following the content anymore. The content is actually following you. Whatever your behavior is, that will be amplified, and that's the kind of content that you will see more of. And I think publishers will seek to balance these models and have to fit that to their brands. How much of it is curated, how much is socially connected, and how much is surfaced. While big platforms, they will go all in the latest model. I'm quite sure that scaled algorithmic approach will be the one that the big tech platforms will go in. And already that effect is noticeable. A new study from last year by the Pew Research Center shows that 35% of teens in the US between 13 and 17 admit that they're almost constantly on YouTube or TikTok. So it means they're locked in, they're automatically, that surface that's automatically kind of refresh and comes in is the only content they see. That's a third of a generation that is basically locked into social video. And it's increasingly hard to get them there, to reach them there, or to engage them there, because they're only in that space and they're completely locked in that kind of flow. The question is, do they mind? They're staying there, they're coming back. And according to YouTube's own research, of course, who is saying it, 67% of Gen Z are expecting that personalized algorithmic approach they're getting from platforms. And even if you can question if they truly understand the consequences of being sucked in this kind of vortex, but according to the platforms, this is what this generation is actually wants. They want a personalized media offer and not be bothered by content that's not really in their interest sphere. And then of course, everybody's looking to everybody, and the stellar rise of TikTok, with I think almost 2 billion active users or more, has not escaped other social media players. So last year and still we're seeing everybody's copying everyone. It's the kind of big TikTokification of everything. We get a growing amount of almost the same. So it's no wonder that new platforms like Be Real or Paparazzi or others are now being perceived by more fresh, because if everybody starts copying each other's technology is not a distinctive feature anymore. It becomes like a layer, and on top of that layer, you will have to make a distinction with other things. This TikTokification is also affecting the nature of search. Social video is now increasingly the place where discovery starts. TikTok even, I think, made an advertisement a few weeks ago where they say TikTok is search. So they're claiming that space. And also according to internal data from Google, they see that search has become a different kind of thing. They will pivot their own products to a more visual, more interactive approach of searching, in which users want to be surprised and delighted by search results, and not necessarily always directly get an answer to their questions. So it's more a discovery journey rather than getting like a straight list of links and answers from Google. Okay, let's turn to audio now. Probably one of the most exciting areas, because it still has so much potential, even if the business model itself is still far from established. And I think the latest data also suggests that there is a really decrease of actually podcasts that are being launched, not so much because there's not an opportunity anymore, but the business model for individual creators is very unclear. Podcasts are, however, a good match with the current age of crises that we saw as an overall context. Listeners consider podcast spaces of tolerance and trust, so they feel that this is a moment where they can actually get to rest and get to connect again with themselves and with the world. And the strong values that this media has over video contrast with perception of other media like social, that are considered places of misinformation, of information overload. Audio doesn't have that perception. It has perception of to be a more calm, a more trustworthy medium, and that's something to consider as well. And there's still a lot of audio moments that are up for grabs. The flexibility of audio allows people to engage with podcasts and streaming music during many unserved moments throughout the day. So these moments are still up for grab. And of course, as a competition for attention grows, publishers will need to invest more in discovery. I think that's the biggest pain point now for podcasts is discovery. There's so much out there. How do you actually make sure that people get to your podcast? And audience engagement. It's not just enough to deliver your podcast. How do you continue the narrative? How do you interact? How do you communicate? What's the follow-up if you want to win the battle for the ear? Podcast listeners are a highly prized demographic for brands, so they're attractive, they're young, they're urban, they're ultra connected, they're over consumers of media, they're highly educated. That's all really interesting, and I would say from a commercial perspective, certainly the kind of target group you're looking for. But if you look at from another perspective, it means that we're still missing a huge audience. There's a huge audience there that's still not served with this kind of podcast and audio. Data shows there's a lot of potential for growth in the industry among non-listeners, so people who don't listen to podcasts. 53% doesn't know what a podcast is. That's a big audience that you just have to educate. You just have to say what podcast is, how they have to do it. So removing those hurdles will certainly fuel growth for audio and for podcasts. On the technology side, we see that podcasts are moving into real-time audio briefs, and the refresh from the Insider is an example that's breaking new grounds by offering listeners updated on-demand news in a podcast format. So they're individual produced live segments, but they're stitched together in a seamless kind of experience and a podcast kind of experience. And that's interesting. So it's not a pre-recorded and completely nice tailored way of working towards a podcast. It's a live broadcast that becomes a stitched podcast in the process. Moreover, the boundaries between audio and video seem to become much more fluid. YouTube is now actually the main platform that's most used by weekly podcast listeners. So the diehard podcast listeners, the one that listen frequently, are switching more to video as a means to listen to podcasts as well. And many podcast hosts are also playing into that by having filming themselves in their studios or having a bit more kind of visuals in their recording. Finally, artificial intelligence is stretching the boundary of audio. So we're talking a lot about podcasts, but also at Mediahuis, we're looking much more in audio in a broader sense. Voice cloning and synthetic text-to-speech are no longer fringe technologies. This is it's accessible to everyone, and it's an extensive landscape. It's growing every day. These AI-driven tools make it possible for any publisher to introduce new audio formats, from articles that are being read to short audio snippets to audio summaries. There's a lot of things that are possible there, and I expect an explosion of these audio formats in the year ahead. And that same smart technology helps also to gather much more rich metadata information out of podcasts. So it's not just about putting text to speech, it's also going from speech to text again and using that text to enrich your discovery process. So getting really rich metadata out of that. So allowing for new entry points to your podcasts. So not just play and search, but many other ways to actually disclose and kind of have entries to your podcasts. And finally, I would say that the race to the perfect translation technology that's happening in the background will remove any barriers between languages. So you can listen to any content in any language wherever you are. Of course, there will always be the local context that's important, even if you suddenly understand Hokkien here, as in this example from Facebook, you might not really be interested in stories from that local context. So that's a limitation that will stay. Another evolution that by technology that is fueled by technology is the further decentralization of media, no longer centrally made and distributed, but many-sided, and this has been a very volatile landscape, which has inflated and deflated, I think, in the year that we had, and it's unclear where it will be going in the years that comes. But for a while, platforms, what you see is certainly that platforms are empowering creators at every step, because they know they're the ones that can level the playing field between professional media and individual content creators. Platforms can really enable these creators, and in a way, fame is accessible to everyone thanks to these tools, these platforms and technologies. And lately, the numbers to monetize your following have increased exponentially. So that's a quite recent evolution, that all of these platforms now also allow for monetization. It's about revenue shares, it's subscription modeling, it's merchandising, it's everything, it's small gifting. Platforms know that in order to attract audiences and generate content, they will need to facilitate talent. And from a traditional media perspective, that's a big challenge, because if talent is facilitated by tech platforms, but not by us, we might lose talent to those platforms. If you take a close look of, however, to all these creators, then you can actually see that they're not all equal. There's a real power law at work. A recent analysis by Mosaic Ventures showed that only a very tiny fraction of all YouTube channels, less than 1% actually, attracts more than 100,000 subscribers. So it's a really long tail with a very fat beginning. And the ones that stand out are, I would say, no longer individual creators. I think you're all familiar with Mr. Beast. That's not an individual creator anymore. It's a media imperium and does incredibly large stunts, like giving away a private island or recreating Squid Games in real life. You need a huge production team to set that actually up. And with Web3, we also saw a new shift, one that flips the old creator playbook, where before it was about making content, building an audience, and then trying to monetize. You see that that's a bit shifting. The rise or the advent of NFTs, these kind of tokens, yeah, they enable digital scarcity, and yeah, they offer an audience an opportunity to own a symbol of their fandom. So they can own a part of the content, and that makes that there is a willingness to pay upfront. In that sense, tokens can become an access to content and an access to a community. And you first issue the token, you sell the token, you activate the shareholders, and then you create the content, which is actually a flipped around script where you first sell tickets and then you start making content. So NFTs, of course, they try to solve the idea of digital abundance, and a lot of these new platforms that we have seen rising in that sphere of that decentralized internet are clustered together in something that most of us don't really know. It's an uncharted territory called the Fediverse. I think the one that popped out there was Mastodon, which became more popular when Elon Musk took over Twitter and everybody abandoned Twitter. But mass adoption is certainly not obvious. The ways these decentralized platforms are organized and structured are completely different than the kind of centralized platforms that we knew. And I, for one, am very skeptical about this becoming or this seeing mass adoption actually. As we talked about NFTs, there was a big hype at the end of 21. I think even during the first half of 22. Because everybody saw it as a way to solve the problem that in the internet everything is abundant. You can replicate and copy everything 100 times. With the NFTs, you can try to solve this by making it more limited and then making more valuable. And these digital assets then track back to artists that have made them and give fans something unique. And media companies like Times and like Forbes, they are going early, have gone early, are quite successful, especially Times. Even if, from my perspective, if you look at it, it feels more like a digital art gallery that you try to sell, much more than the full potential of this token-based media economy that NFTs potentially could unlock. And as I said, the hype quickly crashed during 2022. I would say for most media companies, for most consumers, actually, it's too complex, it's too volatile. I don't know if you ever have tried to mint an NFT, if you have tried to open a digital wallet, if you've tried collecting them, but it's still a niche audience that's able to do this. It's still too difficult of a journey and experience. Does it mean that it's gone forever? I'm not sure, but it's a high risk strategy, and most media companies are now not necessarily further investing in it as a top priority. And I would say it's a bit the same for the Metaverse. It was also a much hyped idea that's far from realized. I think that we have all experienced that it's not really flying so far and so fast, even if that was predicted that it would take years to really become something. But according to Meta, who are still very bullish about it and early believers, there is a kind of inevitability. Media will, for them, evolve from kind of a more a static way to a more natural and immersive form. So it's not flat, it's not immobile, but it feels lifelike, and it's something you can completely experience as an immersive experience. However, there are quite some hurdles to be taken. And if you consider the storytelling potential versus the ease to create, which is, I think, for a media company, always an interesting grid to look at, like how immersive and how much experience can I offer with a storytelling format versus how hard is it to create. You will have to find a balance between how easy it is to make and how much it engages your audience. And then you will see VR and AR are high up on the potential for storytelling, but very complex to create and consume. And you will see that these kind of mobile video formats, which are now popular, are somewhere more, are lower in this curve, and actually are also much more popular and are made much easier. Certainly, if you compare how easy it is for a 16-year-old to create an engaging TikTok versus how hard it is for Metaverse to create an interesting Metaverse experience, I think as long as that gap is too big, the 16-year-old TikTok experience will win. That doesn't mean that that we should dismiss the Metaverse altogether. It's maybe a pipe dream that's far away, but if you look at the different aspects of the Metaverse, then almost all of them are somewhere already there. They're just not combined, but a continuous experience, a live experience, an immersive experience, a simultaneous experience, the fact that there is an economy and that it's kind of connected, and that's already all there in different forms. It's just not kind of a connected and continuous environment that brings it all together. But media can already learn what makes some of these aspects of the Metaverse a fascinating idea, and are there some of these aspects that you already can start adopting in your current proposition? And perhaps the most fascinating aspect of virtual worlds that seems to be taking off independently of the actual Metaverse are avatars or virtual beings. It's one of the key forms of self-expression that the next generation uses in social spaces, digital fashion, avatar customization, and it can have a profound effect on people's self-confidence, on their ability to express themselves online, and it's a booming thing that will take off independently, I think, from the Metaverse. Really interesting to look into it. And whatever your view is, the Metaverse is a place of experiments. So if you have the budgets and if you have the willingness, then it's certainly something to look into. Dedicated production houses like Stage 11 in Paris are redefining what media experiences could be. I know some of the bigger public broadcasters also have experiments in the Metaverse, and I think it's really good that there are some companies that are trying to push the boundaries and explore this medium. But so for most companies, it will be just about building understanding. You don't necessarily have to be active in the Metaverse yourself, but it's good to keep track of it and just wonder how it can fit in your strategies from 2 to 5 years on to maybe further down the road. Meanwhile, I would say the Metaverse or the Hypeverse is on its way down on the curve. All the places like Decentraland, the Sandbox, have very few actively daily users. VR environments like Horizon Worlds, they struggle still with friction. It's not a good experience. I've been in there, I think even with the future Mediahuis, I think I was invited in such an environment, and it felt a little bit like going back to Second Life, but then in a new setting. So it still involves gearing up or a cumbersome onboarding experience or clunky navigation. We're not yet there. And I guess a meta question hanging over the metaverse is probably also what it will evolve into. Will be an open or a closed ecosystem? Who will then control the access? That's always the most important. Will it be owned and by big platforms who will then also control monetization, data, and anything else in there? Who will be able to create experiences that capture attention? Who will be able to monetize? I look forward to see how that evolves. Finally, for today, the one that everybody has, of course, on their mind, and I guess the most rapidly evolving field is that of artificial intelligence. And there, I always say everything that can be automated will be automated, which doesn't mean that AI is just about automation. I think the reality is much more nuanced. In fact, automation is perhaps the least interesting approach to AI, because then you just replace old processes, but you could wonder if it's not worth to rethink your process and to come up with new kind of creative processes with AI. So that's a bit more an assisted or augmented way of working. And maybe there's opportunities that are completely novel and that wouldn't be possible without AI, and that really transform how you approach your media. So more than, I think we're still having 15 minutes, so I'll have to speed up. But my advice always is, in order to truly understand what AI can do within your newsroom, within your media company, is to really map opportunities across your value chain and really understand where it can add value, as well as the risks and the challenges it might have. It means that you have to understand the distinctive capabilities of AI, and that you have to think about where it might add intelligence to steps in your production process, where it can automate, where it can augment, and where it can actually transform some of these steps. From my perspective, and it's maybe less interesting for this audience, we look a lot to finally decoupling our digital news production from print creation. Now, these things are still very much, like the space in your newspaper is still very much defining your process. With AI, there's an opportunity to have a much more fluidly way to fit digital creation to print in an automated way, in a very intelligent way, without having to connect these things so hard. One of the most disruptive and rapidly accelerating aspects of AI is of course the generative AI, which you all are familiar with and probably have experimented with, creating realistic but also disruptive and frightening images just from any text prompt. And that landscape is rapidly expanding. AI is being used to create stories, articles, generate summaries, headlines, modify the tone of voice. It will raise the bar for creative talent. I think what you make as a human will have to be more distinctive, will have to be more human, because if it's something that a machine can do, it might not be a fair competition with this rapidly expanding landscape. I think the most viral AI breakthrough that everybody's talking about now is the launch of ChatGPT, that large language model that succeeds in natural feeling conversations and producing convincing output. Even if it's factually completely incorrect, it still feels like a good textual output. And yeah, you can see that combinations of all these tools will fuel a kind of deluge and explosion of generated content. Certainly on the marketing side of things, we'll see an explosion of content. and potentially also disruptive because these large language models feed themselves, of course, on existing content. They're able to extract an endless number of formats from news articles. And I've experienced that even if they're behind the client-side paywall, these language models can just scrape the text and repackage them and offer this somewhere else. I've been listening to New York Times articles as podcasts that were scraped by an AI and then repackaged as a podcast, and I don't have a New York Times subscription. I would worry as a publisher because that's really disruptive for a business model. So publishers will have to rethink how they will cope with these AI startups that are offering remixes and generated content based on their original reporting. Moreover, the ease with which these images can be generated, detached from reality, should give us all some pause. Examples already show that this technology is used to manipulate the truth, from generating fake invasions to deep faking video calls with politicians. And if seeing is no longer believing and every image is potentially a lie, then the question becomes, how can we kind of experience a shared sense of reality that we need in that polarized and fragmented world that we're living in together? So for news media, that's a challenge. Might be about proving what still is real rather than exposing what is false. Finally, and then I end on the sober note, with that great power comes great responsibility. If we're introducing all these new technologies in our newsrooms, in our media companies, we should more than ever start the ethical discussion, not just among product people that are familiar with these technologies, but front and center with the newsrooms and the content creators and our audiences, being very transparent there. So that's it. There are more trends in the deck online, as well as some key questions like these and exercises that you can look into to see how these trends might impact whatever you do, how you can work with these insights to draft scenarios, and it can help guide your actions and options in the year ahead. I think that's it, and I'll stop sharing and go back to the group.
Thank you, Ezra. There are some questions in the chat and also some people raising hands.
Yeah.
So as you want.
I have to look at the questions in the chat. Did you flag questions, or do I have to?
Well, I can start with the ones that went first.
Yeah, so how do you see the development of the future NFTs? As I said, I think the NFT as a digital collectible, that's gone out of the window. I don't believe that in that hype anymore. The NFT as a token access, like having a token gate, where where a digital asset becomes a key to unlocking content, to unlocking access to a community. I still think that there is potential. So we'll see that's evolving. Somebody's sharing a report. Could the concentration, huge accounts, communities of few individual players with big shows on it game be the biggest challenge? We have to admit that PSB are weak in comparison of stars to Twitch. I think the incredibly fragmented media landscape and certainly the fact that platforms are facilitating talent, that's a big challenge for public broadcasters and for media companies, traditional media companies, because in such an abundant world of content, you see it either goes on a platform level, and your platform level is the Netflixes, the Spotifys, that are your extra entry points, or it's individual creators and shows. So as big media companies or public broadcasters, I would really invest in talent, diversity of your talent, nourish talent, really make sure that you have your own talent, and you might not be able to hold them because there will be the attraction of, but you have something else that is a kind of trustworthiness, a kind of brand value, a connection with your communities that are there. But that's your entry point to play a role in that market, I think. Biggest threats, dependency on controlling and owning our platforms. Yes. Yeah, there is of course something about being outpaced, but as I said, I don't believe that ultimately the competition is about technology. The TikTokification of everything already shows that nowadays technology is copied like in an instant. ChatGPT was out there, and 5 days later, everybody had a version of ChatGPT that was ripped off, or so it will become about the stories you have to tell, the content that you have, the talent that you have, the connection with your communities. And that's not so easily to copy, you know, like a connection that you have, your creativity, your ideas is not something that big tech platforms have necessarily the advantage over us. So I think I'm not so negative about that. I think in the end, technology is not what's the most distinctive feature. About it's an arm race, as AI can be used as effective to recognize deepfakes and generate images as to generate them. Some sort of AI filtering, moderation for images will be a norm very soon. I know that there is a debate currently going on about having watermarks so that you would be able to see that something is generated by ChatGPT or generated by DALL-E or something else. So there that could be part of regulation, that anything that's AI produced should have some kind of digital watermark so that it can be traced back as being an AI generated piece of content. Of course, as long as that's not enforced, it will be really hard to adopt it with across all industries, I think. I think I went through the main questions that I spotted here. Sarah, I don't know if there was anything else in the room.
Well, some people raised their hand, but I'm not sure if I don't see them anymore. I know, Lara, you had your hand raised, but maybe you don't have a question anymore. And I think Jeff, there was Jack, it was the same for you. So not sure if you're still have a question, or anyone else. Maybe just raise your hand. I think it's easier than the chat. But I do see that everyone is really enthusiastic about your presentation, Ezra, in the chat. So
that's good. Well, it is available. If you've not yet found it, Sarah, I can give it to you, and you can distribute it to this group. There's a lot in there, so you might just want to take some time and read chapter by chapter and see what is meaningful for you. I see a hand there from Peter, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ezra, for a really great presentation. I was wondering about your view on this dilemma, considering so much happening now, when new trends are rising, new technology, new platforms, everything. We're living in a very fragmented media reality where legacy media and broadcast media are having huge issues in reaching out to their target groups and even tell that they are existing. So I recently did a study where we concluded that different use of different social media platforms and third-party platforms is highly beneficial when reaching out to a bigger amount of people. But at the same time, the content published on these channels is meeting issues connected to lower attention span and superficial calls of interaction, which leads to and contributed to create a lower quality content, which further leads to the fact that legacy media, instead of expanding their audiences and focusing on building a strong brand with a clear communication through their own channels, contribute to fragmenting their already existing audiences across different platforms. So I were interested in your meanings around this, like how should the broadcasters and legacy media companies considering what's good in investing in which platforms should I use and which not, and actually which effect does it have when it comes to trying building a trustful relationship.
Thank you, Peter, for your question. I think I would need another hour to give a comprehensive answer on that. But I think that the main position, that was my position when I worked at ABU, and it's also our position at Mediahuis, is that first and foremost, you have to really work on making your own destination, working on your own destination. Certainly, if you're an established brand that has a certain community, that's your stronghold, and that's where you are completely in control of the narrative, of the journeys, and the experience. That you're not in control when you're on TikTok. You're not in control if you're on any of the other platforms. But you might need you need to be visible there. You need to be front and center. You need to have some presence there to engage with audiences where they are as well. So I don't think it's a complete. We will not return to a situation where everybody will automatically be sucked in our own destinations, and those social platforms will no longer be relevant. I don't believe that. So having a clear presence with certain boundaries. Don't give away your content for free. Don't put all your resources in there, but have an honest outreach to people there. Build a community. Explain who you are. Make a connection with your talent, and that's a good starting point for people having your brand on top of their mind, and then discovering your destination. So.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think, Sarah, we're kind of through the hour. It took me longer than I thought, but you see, I think I timed for 30 minutes and it becomes 45. So.
Okay, but thank you, Ezra, for this very interesting presentation, and for all of the other ones. I think we can get the conversation going in our hub meetings every Friday. So looking forward to see you there, and then we will be sending you the recording and some notes as well in the upcoming week. Thank you, everyone, and see you later.
Bye.
Bye.